What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and this is another Hip Hop Now podcast bonus episode brought to you by the producers of this podcast over at patreon.com/hiphopnow. And if you would like to join them in this podcast movement, support the podcast, support the continuation of the podcast, which is most important. If you're interested in this kind of content, visit patreon.com/hiphopnow. And if that was too quick, the link to that website is in the description of this episode. Kendrick Lamar. I've said it before. I've reviewed the albums. I've listened to the music. I've made statements about him being my favorite rapper, hands down, today. Benny the Butcher is number 2. But time and time again, he reinforces why mine, not everybody's, but mine, my fandom as it relates to him and his music and what he chooses to create, which is art. Now, there's a lot of conversation around Kendrick Lamar, and in a lot of ways, the subject of Kendrick Lamar and his music and his rhyming can be very polarizing in a similar way to Eminem. And I know you look at the content and say, well, they're two very different audiences, but I'm not really comparing them, right, and their content. But I feel like the reaction from the audiences is pretty similar, right? There's either extreme stands of Kendrick Lamar, or there are extreme detractors of Kendrick Lamar. And then there are those people in the middle who really don't get involved, who really don't have much to say, who are just honest about their opinion, and they say, I really can't get into them. The end. And I think all three are fine. But given the fact that this is a commentary on Kendrick Lamar and why I chose to put King Kendrick, King Kunta, if you will, on the cover of this podcast episode, is the simple fact that I want to prove to you why people hold him in such high regard and what separates him from his counterparts, the counterparts of his generation. That's the big three. That's J. Cole and Drake. What separates him is obvious, right? He is doing something different from those two guys. Drake is more so leaning into the pop, hip hop side of things, rap, sing. He's doing whatever is popular, right? That's where pop comes from. J. Cole is more of like the underground hero who has a lot of exposure, and you know, he can get in his bag as far as rhyming. People champion him because he could have possibly fell off at one point. Because he was so lyrical and he was trying to, you know, hit the mainstream. But I think he's hit his stride as far as the comfort zone for him. And I think it's a perfect balance between what we liked about J. Cole and what I guess the record label would want him to do, right? His popularity is through the roof. But Kendrick is different. Kendrick is more so about harnessing the history of hip-hop, east, west, south, whatever, the history of black music, whether it be hip-hop, jazz, blues, R&B, soul. He's more about harnessing all of these influences and presenting them in a new school way, presenting them as art. When you listen to Kendrick Lamar's bars, typically, it's not necessarily about slick lines. They're there. They're in the songs. But that's not the goal. It's about the wordplay. It's about the messages. It's about the imagery. It's about connecting with you as an individual, not just as a music fan, but just as a person, lyrically. It's about how he puts those words together to accomplish all of those feelings and emotions from the listening audience. That's why people call it art, because it evokes emotion when you hear it, when you see it. And some people may feel like, well, it's not that deep, it's just rapping bars. Well, I beg to differ as someone who's written poetry and writes rhyme. It is art. Don't shortchange our art form just because you want to be in the cool crowd, because you're not in the cool crowd. What you have to realize is, are you big enough of a music fan to recognize art when it's happening in real time? Or do you need a retrospective to tell you what you heard? There's a very big difference. It's sort of like when an athlete is playing and you hate them, and you really don't acknowledge any of their accomplishments because you really, you're in the crux of battling over what team is better. And then that person retires and you start to see all those old clips and highlights and accomplishments, and you start to look back and say, you know what? He belongs in the Hall of Fame. I hated him the whole time he played, but I cannot deny his accomplishments. And that's the same thing how I feel about Kendrick Lamar, right? Or anyone like him that's still actively rhyming. It's difficult when you in it to see it. But there are a lot of people who see it. What he's doing is he is preserving the culture in the way he approaches his music. He's not going to give you 10%. He's not going to give you what you've already heard. He's going to give you what he thinks should be said, what he thinks should be out there. Now, this is the crazy part about Kendrick Lamar and why a lot of people use King Kendrick. This brother ain't put out a whack project yet. Let's look at the receipts, because we don't just do headlines. So if we're going to count it, let's just say Section 80, right? Quasi-album, quasi/mixtape that came out before his official debut. If you've never heard it, go listen to it. Nice precursor to his official debut, Good Kid, Mad City. Section 80, very dope. Good Kid, Mad City, classic. And I feel comfortable saying so, for all the reasons that I've probably given in past podcasts. His follow-up, To Pimp a Butterfly, completely different from what you had been hearing from him. But my description of him preserving music and using the history of black music from all genres all culminated into Pimp a Butterfly. Why? Because that's just the kind of dude he is. Very dope musically, very dope lyrically. May not be for everyone, but nonetheless, it's considered a very dope album. That's 3 projects in a row that are dope. I know people who loved Untitled, Unmastered, sort of like a unreleased B-sides, cutting room floor, songs that didn't make the album. I know people who love that joint, and guess what? That quote-unquote throwaways project was better than some dude's official album. And the last album he released, damn, probably a mix between Good Kid, Mad City and To Pimp a Butterfly. Almost feeling like the end of what you're supposed to do when you have a great career. Like, boom, boom, this is the end of the trilogy. Good night. I mean, accolades, awards, lyrics, bars, hip hop, still maintaining some of those elements, even records that speak to radio. Now, I know some people don't feel as strongly about all of these projects, and that's fine, because, his opinions are subjective. But I don't think anyone can straight up comfortably call it whack. Anybody that puts that much effort into what they write and what's there musically it's difficult to call that whack. I'm not talking about somebody who spent time rhyming, who spent time going through beats. That's the minimum for anyone working on a project. That is the minimum. It's about the next level you go to when you're writing, right? What am I writing about? Why am I writing about it? How will I convey it? How can I add things to convey my message even more beyond my words? How can I do more with my words and the inflections in my voice to convey the things I'm saying? There are levels to rapping. There are levels to producing. And I feel like Kendrick Lamar takes his time to craft these projects so that when you listen to them, you can't deny the work. You may not like the bars, you may not like the flow, you may not like the beats, but you can't deny the work. You can't deny the art in it. So on the verge of a brand new album from Kendrick Lamar, his last on TDE, rumored to be a double album. If you already heard it and you from the feature, you know what to do. Get your ass out of here. We ain't talking to y'all. But the album is titled Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. And there have been all kinds of rumors about what the approach is going to be musically. I've heard things from like rock to country. But he released the Heart 5 using Marvin Gaye's I Want You as a sample. Lyrically, the production is cool, but the production is there to service the lyrics, and that's why it works. The video is there, the visuals are there to service the lyrics and the music in general. So it's not an original thing that's happening. It's a preservation of what was, which doesn't happen that often, and people often forget. Top fives from years ago are not top fives of today. In some ways, because some projects come out and bump them out of the top five. That's cool. But in a lot of ways, people forget about some of those projects. If they're not being talked about, people forget how great they were at the time they came out. If you look at hip hop today, it'd be very difficult to see a top five that's not exclusively 90s music. It's almost as if people forgot about how great the 80s were, in particular 88 for hip hop. It happens, and it happens a lot. But nevertheless, what Kendrick is doing with his music, with his special position in hip hop to be allowed to be this creative, allowed to take his time with projects and come out and still have people interested in what he has next. I mean, it's something to marvel at when you're talking about a quote unquote current artist, right? Jay-Z and Nas get that attention because of what they've done in the past. You're kind of hoping you get a slice of the past again. But Kendrick is helping to move the genre forward. Every time he releases, other rappers have to pay attention. Because as much money and as much attention and record spins as they may get, they know they're not working as hard. And that's why he's the king. What do you feel about Kendrick Lamar, his music, and his new album, which will be coming out pretty soon? Leave your comments in the comment section below, or you can hit me up on social media, whether that's TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter. How about that? At Vegas World INC. And please know, subscribe to this podcast, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. All you got to do is type in the search bar Hip Hop Now Podcast, hit subscribe, and stay locked into weekly hip hop content. If you would like to support this podcast or become a producer of this podcast, which is one and the same, visit patreon.com/hiphopnow. Until next time, y'all, I'm not a critic. I'm a fan. Peace.